Hello again. This is week 2 of painting seasonal flowers, and this week I'm going to demonstrate a hellebore, having finally given in and bought some from a garden centre, although I do finally have some appearing in the garden. This one came from the garden and I picked it a week ago, and I've kept it immersed in a bucket of water, completely immersed. That way they will actually live for up to 2 weeks and be fine, and the buds will continue to open. But if you don't immerse them in the water, that doesn't happen. So that's my first little tip. And I've decided, although I have bought this huge one, I don't know if you can see it, it's very, very pretty. It's paler in many places and quite pink, but I've actually decided to go for the darker colours because I find that they are more challenging, and I want to try and help you with the painting of the depth. Music's going to go dark and light, I think, as well. I've decided to use the wet on wet technique using these colours, and so let's put that to one side. Often when I paint the dark coloured hellebores or any dark coloured flower, I tend to use the layering technique, but I'm not actually going to do that today because I don't have the time to sit and wait for each layer to dry, which you really should do if you're trying to build up colour in a more sort of botanical way. So I'm actually going to use the wet on wet technique and allow the colours to blend, and hopefully I can get some depth doing that as well. I've masked off the little stamens in the centre with the masking fluid or the drawing gum, and used a little pen and nib. And so I'm ready to go. Got some brushes out. I'm using Fabriano paper because I like Fabriano for painting flowers. I prefer the Bockingford and the Saunders for buildings perhaps, but for flowers I find that the Fabriano is better. I've got a size 8 brush out and a smaller one. Whether I shall use it or not, I'm not sure. And a very small one for the tiny little stamens in the centre. And the only acrylic brush I own is this, if I want to do some lifting out. That way I don't have to keep drying my brush. Right, I'm going to try to go as dark as this. But as you see, there are lighter petals underneath, which is going to make a lovely contrast. So I'll start with the top petal. I'm going to dampen it first and work a petal at a time using the wet on wet technique. And I actually see a lot of colours, different tones of colour in the whole thing, showing through many tones. So I'm actually going to start off with a permanent rose to hopefully then get a lovely light pink showing through. It's getting lighter at the edge, so spread that through down with the water. The music should be better. I finally got around to making a playlist, hopefully with music that doesn't breach copyright. It took me a while, but I think it'll be worth it. Been a bit careless here. and I've actually just, doesn't really matter because the stalk's behind there and I can make that a bit darker anyway. But I do want to just get that shape. Right, so that's a nice little base of a permanent rose. Really, I ought to just let that soak into the paper a little bit more, but I'm actually not going to. I'm going to go for a quinacridone violet now and blend it into the permanent rose. And I'm gradually, hopefully, going to build up to a nice darker colour. End result. So you need to get all your colours ready first, but you can see actually already that that pink is showing through. And while that's still damp, I'm actually just going to put a little bit of depth that I see underneath the edge of that petal, which is going to be helpful. I'm not drawing a line, I'm just dropping in a little bit of the depth there onto the dry paper, which helps me to get a nice edge without it looking like a hard line. And I just mixed a little bit of, I often use ultramarine blue to create some darks, but I actually have got a very messy little situation here with some Windsor blue red shade and some of the quinacridone violet to create nice darks. A pretty dark, okay, which looks nice at the edge whenever you see that dark edge appearing at the edge of the petal. Right, I've kept my light here where I need it to create the shape of the petal turning in. Right, okay, so I've now got to try and make this darker still. I've got some permanent carmine. They call these purple hellebores, but they're not just purple, are they? So always work in the direction that you see the markings actually within the petal. Right, that's not looking too bad. A little bit of alizarin. And then I'm going to go back with my dark. I ought to let that dry a bit. It is actually quite wet. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to carry on with one of the lighter petals at the side. Again, when you have more time and you want to paint a petal that's next to one that's still wet, you can leave it to dry, or just leave a little gap at the edge of the petal here, which you can deal with later, but it will actually help to allow you to keep going while you're in the zone. And really, if you do touch it and it starts to blend with this technique, it doesn't matter. It's not a botanical study, it's just a little wet on wet demo. A lot of purple in this petal under here. See, the depth is showing up here a bit more. So I'm trying to create shape into my petal as I work. Right, now I think I can just go back and pop a little bit of this really dark colour onto here, which is the darkest area in the whole flower. You have to be careful not to kind of get a double edge going on there when you work to the edges, when you've got one colour on top of another. And you're not going to see what you've got until you allow it to dry. But I can actually see all the different tones of pink that I've put in there now, and that actually has become quite dark there, which is what I was aiming for. I would strongly advise you to allow areas to dry before painting next to them. Where's my lifting off acrylic thing? Disappeared already. Oh well, where's that gone? Never mind. I'll use this. There we go, just getting some light back in. So you do need quite a dry brush for doing this. So have a tissue in your hand. There, that's got some shape, and I'm not going to see what I've got until it's dry. There's no getting away from touching it quite a lot, which isn't my favourite way of painting flowers, but you know, when you want the depth, I think that's what you've got to do if you're you know, layering it up or painting in this way. You've got to keep touching and adding. Just dampen that little area there, little petal. Popping that pink down first. Bringing it down with some water and popping the purple in, as you see the purple there. Maybe you won't want to get this much depth into your hellebore if you paint one. Maybe you find it easier to actually just go with a lighter flower, but I just wanted to demonstrate the getting of the depth. Right. Now inside here I can see some green. Got a stamen there. Goodness me. That's either that or cat hair. Oh, it's looking suspiciously like a cat hair. She's been up here again, I guess. So when you've got the masking there, you need to paint right over the top of it, otherwise it's not going to work. You'll get distorted shapes. A little bit of green. This is sort of an olive green, which is made up of cadmium yellow and the Windsor blue cadmium yellow and Payne's grey. Much lighter under here. But it's got a fold back there, which I'll just leave for the moment, and then I'll deal with that separately, and it's darker. So that's going to work quite well if I just paint that as a separate little section. Continuing to paint in the direction that I see the petals, the markings. That's Chopin at the moment. He doesn't go quite so crazy, does he? It is going to dry up lighter than when I apply it, so bear that in mind. If it starts to get a little bit dull, which it can do as it dries, just wash a little bit of a permanent rose over the top, and then you'll get that brightness back again. Okay, so far so good. Well, let's put a bit of dark here. Just to show that little folded area. That's the outside of the petal, which that is the outside of the petal. That's the outside of the petal folded back in, and that's why it's so dark. They seem to be much darker. The outer petals seem to be much darker. Right, so I'm going to leave that for the moment. I'll go on to this little bud at the top here. While the flower is drying, and then maybe I can get the masking off. There's not much of that showing. You can see this bud. Tends to be quite dark because again that the outer petals are what you see. But try to get dark and light because otherwise it's going to look flat. Being careful again not to because that's a smaller area. I haven't used the well, I'm using wet on wet, but not putting the water down first. And leave. So now I'll go with the stalk, I think, which has got a spotty appearance, but I haven't done anything about trying to create that with masking fluid or anything. I think it just gets too contrived, so I'll just try to leave some light in there. When you're painting like this, you don't have to put every detail in, just try to use your paint to give the impression without, you know, getting too bogged down with things like masking fluid. It becomes a little bit too contrived, but it's very dark where it leaves the flower here underneath, and it has a kind of concertina effect. Poor thing's had it nearly. Right, so I see some green right underneath them. Sometimes you can see a raw sienna in these hellebores, but I don't, not in this one particularly. I see some green showing through. So while that's still wet, I'm going to pop some colour in. One side more than the other. Lots of colours actually in there, and it gets darker as you get further down towards the end of the stalk. So it's nice allowing the colours to actually mix on the page rather than always mixing them in your palette. It has a more organic, freer, more natural looking result, I think. It gets very, very dark at the bottom here. So dropping that in, and hopefully the wet on wet's going to create a little bit of the textured effect that you see. Dropping a bit of water back in. Textured effect that you see in the actual flower stalk. Right, I haven't got so much longer to go before my little half an hour is up, and it does make life more difficult for the tech team if I go on too long. So I'm actually going to just stop, dry this off, and then paint a leaf or two and carry on after. Okay, I've allowed it to dry completely. I've painted in a couple of leaves here, and I've taken the masking fluid off. So I just want to deal with that centre before I put in this little leaf that's sitting behind the stalk here. So I'm using Jan Blanch for this, but most yellows would do, as long as they're not too citrusy. You need a nice warm yellow there. So I'll leave that to dry before I start putting in the little stamens that hang down. They're quite important. So the leaf is a variety of different greens, helpful. So I've got Windsor Blue red shade going on with my dark green mix, and I won't bother to wet it because I'm running out of time. I'm just going to quickly just paint those in the direction that I see the markings. So I'm putting water on afterwards, just to give it some shapes in the leaf and some texture. And I'm not going to be fussy with them. I don't know if you can see that leaf. This is not very helpful when it's sitting off behind the stalk like that. And I painted this extra bud here as well, the little one that's on the side. So drop some water back on there, create some texture into it, and then leave it. It's got a light and a dark side, which I'm pleased about. And also they have, some of them have, little touches of red going on edges and within the veins and things, so don't overdo that, just drop a little bit in and let it make its way in the water and let it dry and see what happens. You can always just build that up afterwards if you feel you need to do a bit more to those leaves. You can use the other ends of your brush just to mark in a few vein shapes. But actually when that dries, that's not going to look too bad. So that's all I'm going to do with those leaves. I want to just put in, I've got one or two things, other ideas of the way of portraying these I want to show you. So I've got my tiny brush and I'm just going to lean over mine and just start at the top, bear down and lift up a little bit. But I'm also leaving some light and some white there as well, because I feel that that's going to be helpful. A little bit of shadow going on between the little yellow stamens there. And that's it, that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to put a back. I don't know that they always need to have a background, especially when there's something as dark as this. You can go into a background if you feel you'd like to, but you know, I think they stand quite well on their own. So let me now show you one or two other ideas for portraying them. I actually painted this one again after retrieving it from its bucket of water, and I like to take sections of a hellebore because I love the various different parts of them, so I separate them sometimes and just paint them like this, just taking sections of them, making something of a botanical study. It's a bit of a study really of the different aspects that you see in these flowers. And so that's one thing that you could do, and it makes quite a nice painting. Certainly nice to do, but if you want to be a little bit more precise and create a botanical study, this is the layering technique, and I painted it on a smoother paper, and that's layering up one colour on top of the other, on top of the next, allowing each layer to dry first, and it takes ages. Not sure it's necessary, but there we are. That's a way of painting. Another thing I like to do is to look like I showed you with the pot of hellebores that I have, and just sit the pot in front and just paint them as you see them sitting in the pot or in your vase, or if you've cut them, whatever you do, but just sort of paint them in a natural way as you see them sitting in front of you. And that's what I did there, and that's the pinker one, the one that's somewhat lighter. I also painted this one when the snow was on the ground. Just got the idea of it in the snow, but I haven't put the snow in, so I'll quickly just maybe put a little bit of snow in now, just to see what I can do here. Not a lot to do, but that's another nice way of portraying these flowers, because they often do appear when the snow is on the ground. And I added some of the white as well, so a bit of dry brush work here and there just to show the shadows. We've painted snow before, so you should be fine. Just a little bit of dry brush work here and there, and building up around where they're peeping out from the snow. And if you've got a light area, you could put a little bit more shadow around, for instance that bud, just to show it up a bit more. So that's another way of portraying them in a more natural, freer situation. Okay, and that's all you really need to do. It's nice to bring the colours down, some of the colours down that you've actually got in your flowers, okay? Reflect that down. So that's another thing that you can do, and you've also already painted snowy backgrounds with the salt. But if you want to use more salt and put a really definite background behind, that's painting the pink ones again and then putting the salted background on afterwards. Okay, so that actually takes quite a while, but you end up with quite a nice picture, and it's slightly more painterly, I guess, and makes quite an attractive picture. So there are options there. What have we got? Hellebores 5 ways, I think. Yeah. But that one's sort of dried up. And all you need to do if you just want to paint the one. Right, so I think that's it for this week. Give some thought to the way you'd like to portray them first before you get started. And, do a nice drawing, but don't make your drawing too heavy, especially if you're painting the lighter ones. Don't forget you can use masking fluid to help you, but don't overdo it, and make sure you apply it nicely, because that can ruin your picture. Next week I'm going to demonstrate a white hellebore, and maybe loosely. Okay, so have a good week, and I do hope you find a hellebore. If not, you can copy mine. I'll attach a photograph of my potted one that I showed you at the beginning, so you can paint from. We're having to paint from photographs a little bit more at the moment because we can't always get out to get hold of flowers, and maybe you don't have them in the garden either. So photos, just have to come into it all. But have a good week and enjoy painting a hellebore, and I'll look forward to seeing them, whatever they're like. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.